She won't tell you she's testing you. She won't even admit it to herself. But every word she chooses, every delay in her reply, every subtle shift in tone, it's all part of something deeper than logic. And if you're a man who only listens to what's being said, you've already failed. Because the real message is always behind the curtain. The real question is, who's holding the power when silence enters the room? The truth is brutal. Most men get rejected not because they're unattractive, not because they lack ambition, not because they're bad partners, but because they lack posture. They walk into relationships with their heart in their hands, offering it like a gift, hoping it'll be enough. But women don't fall for offerings. They fall for presence. And presence is silent, unshaken, dangerous. A man with presence doesn't plead. He watches. He doesn't justify. He withdraws. He doesn't chase. He replaces. You've been told since childhood to be kind, to be generous, to be honest. And those aren't bad values unless they come with no boundaries. In the eyes of a woman, especially one emotionally chaotic, a man who doesn't resist is a man who can't be respected. She'll smile when you apologize. She'll nod when you explain. But inside, something begins to die. Desire, mystery, challenge. And when those die, so does her attraction. Let me tell you something most men never realize. Every time you responded instantly, adjusted your schedule for her, softened your words to avoid conflict, you thought you were loving her. She thought you were losing yourself. And in her world, if you lose yourself, she doesn't have to. She wins by default, not because she's evil, but because you made it too easy to win. The game starts way before you even realize you're playing it, long before the first kiss, long before she calls you babe or says she misses you. It starts in the micro moments. You cancel plans when she hints she's bored. You rush to text her back because you're afraid she'll lose interest. You laugh at things you don't find funny. You stay silent when she crosses a line. You thought you were building connection, but you were only showing weakness. And the worst part? She notices. Every single time. Maybe not consciously, but biologically, psychologically. Women are wired to test men. It's not manipulations as it's selection. In ancient times, it was about survival. The man who stood his ground was the man who could protect. Now, it's not about saber-toothed tigers. It's about emotional gravity. Can she feel yours? Can she push and not watch you crumble? Think about the last time she started a pointless argument. The moment felt confusing, even unfair. But deep down, it wasn't about the topic. It was about your reaction. Would you beg? Would you fold? Would you apologize for things you didn't do just to keep the peace? Or would you remain unmoved, grounded, unbothered, quietly powerful? Most men choose peace, and peace, when bought at the price of self-respect, always leads to war later. A woman doesn't respect a man who's afraid to lose her. That's the paradox. The more you show her that you need her validation to feel whole, the less of a man you appear in her eyes. And not because she's cruel, but because something primal inside her is repelled by neediness. She wants to feel chosen, not chased. She wants to feel like you could have anyone. And yet, you're here. But if you act like she's your only shot, she'll start treating you like a fan, not a partner. There's a reason the men she obsesses over are often the ones who don't obsess over her. It's not about being mean. It's about being centered. She respects the man who walks away when respect disappears. The man who doesn't explain himself to someone who isn't listening. The man who doesn't give energy to chaos. That man, he becomes the exception. And in a world full of men seeking approval, the exception is magnetic. Let me give you a brutal truth. Rejection often has nothing to do with how good of a man you are. It has everything to do with whether you passed her subconscious tests. And passing doesn't mean doing what she says. It means doing what's right, even when she's emotional, even when she threatens to leave, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. Because the man who folds under pressure isn't a man she can trust. She might use you. She might keep you around. But she will never truly surrender to you. She can't. You haven't earned that surrender, not with gifts, not with love letters, not with promises, but with presence, with the kind of silence that makes her heart race, with the kind of look that tells her, I'm not here because I need you, I'm here because I choose to be. And if you stop deserving that choice, I will disappear. And when you do disappear, not as a manipulation, but as a reflection of your standards, something shifts. Suddenly, she remembers everything she took for granted. Suddenly, the same man she overlooked becomes the ghost she can't forget. Not because he played games, but because he didn't play at all. He lived by code. And that code became the mirror where her behavior was exposed. A woman doesn't reject men because they're too kind. She rejects them because they're too soft. Because kindness without boundaries is weakness in disguise. And weakness doesn't create desire, it creates indifference. And nothing is more lethal to attraction than indifference. Now imagine reversing that. Imagine being the man who never over-explains, never overreaches, never overgives. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Imagine what kind of gravity you would command. Imagine how quiet your presence would become, and how loud her thoughts would get in your silence. That's the beginning of a new type of power, the kind Machiavelli would respect, the kind that doesn't chase validation, because it already owns value, and when that value is felt, you're no longer being tested. You've become the one who tests, and that, my friend, changes everything. There's something quietly humiliating about chasing someone who's undecided about you. You don't feel it at first. Your brain tells you you're just being persistent or loyal or proving your intentions. But deep in your gut, there's a quiet sting. Every time she replies late, every time she cancels last minute, every time you lower your standards just to keep her attention. That sting, that's not love, that's self-betrayal. And she can sense it. She may not name it. She may still smile, still entertain your presence, still sleep with you. But something in her shifts. She doesn't see you as the man who could lead. She sees you as the man who's already surrendered. And once she places you in that category, it's only a matter of time before the respect evaporates. Not with drama, not with a breakup text, but with silence, distance, coldness, indifference. What most men don't understand is that the beginning of a relationship is not the beginning of romance. It's the beginning of warfare, not in the toxic, manipulative sense, but in the psychological one. You are not being loved, you are being assessed, measured, watched. And the criteria, it's not in how nice you are, it's in how rare you are. See, most men today are predictable. They rush to validate. They fear silence. They can't stand ambiguity. So when a woman pulls back, even slightly, they panic. They double their effort. They start sending paragraphs. They confess feelings too soon. They offer reassurance she didn't ask for. And in doing so, they teach her one thing. You are emotionally reactive. And that to a woman is a red flag she'll never admit, but always feel. The paradox is this: the moment you try to prove your worth, you've already lost it. Real value doesn't chase, it attracts. It doesn't explain, it shows. And it doesn't fear rejection, it commands choice. Let's get even more real. Imagine a woman texting you, "I'm just not sure how I feel right now." The average man sees this as a challenge to win her over. He sends flowers, plans dates, opens up emotionally, hoping that effort will tip the scale. But the Machiavellian man, he doesn't argue with confusion, he withdraws. Not as a trick, but as a principle. He knows uncertainty is not a door to kick down. It's a sign to step back and protect his peace. And guess what happens? The silence starts speaking louder than the words ever did. She begins to feel the absence of a man who once gave freely, and now doesn't. She re-evaluates. Not because he begged, but because he didn't. And that reversal of emotional gravity creates what no amount of chasing can ever produce. pull. Women test in waves. It starts with sarcasm, then inconsistency, then emotional withdrawal. Each phase is a mirror. She wants to see what version of you will show up. Will you break? Will you beg? Will you shrink? Or will you remain unshaken, forcing her to confront her own chaos? If you fail these early tests, the relationship is doomed. Even if it survives, it'll rot from within. Because no woman can relax into her femininity while carrying the emotional burden of leading a man. She might mother him, she might tolerate him, but she will never melt for him. This is the reality most men don't want to hear. She's not leaving because you're a bad person. She's leaving because you're emotionally predictable, and predictable equals boring. And boring, for a woman with options, is death. Now let's flip the script. Picture this. A man who rarely initiates contact, but when he does, it's sharp, clear, and intentional. A man who doesn't fear losing her, because he knows he was whole long before she arrived. A man who listens more than he speaks, and whose silence carries weight. That man, he becomes the mystery, the story, the puzzle she can't stop trying to solve. It's not about being cold, it's about being controlled. Women don't want robots. They want men who can feel, but don't bleed their emotions all over the table. Vulnerability without timing is exposure. Exposure without control is weakness. And weakness, in the realm of attraction, is always punished. Let me bring this closer to home. Think back to the last time you tried to talk through an issue with her. She was distant, cold, uninterested, and instead of pulling back, you did what you were taught. You explained. You asked if she was okay. You told her how much she meant to you. And with every word, you felt smaller, like she was drifting farther away, not because you said something wrong, but because she already decided you were too available to fight for. You thought being open would bring you closer. But openness without boundaries isn't intimacy. It's submission. And women aren't attracted to men who submit. They might appreciate them. They might applaud them. But they won't desire them, because desire is born in distance, in tension, in unpredictability. Machiavelli would have called it power dynamics, and in love, as in politics, the one who controls the emotional temperature controls the game. The more emotional leverage you give, the more you lose. This is not cruelty, this is clarity. Now you might ask, so what do I do? The answer isn't to become an emotionless shell. It's to become a man who chooses when and how to express. Who doesn't react, he responds. Who doesn't chase, he calibrates. Who understands that emotional discipline is the foundation of masculine respect. Because at the end of the day, a woman doesn't need you to be her therapist. She needs you to be her gravity, the force that holds your frame, even when she's spinning out of control. And that gravity, it's built in moments of restraint, in pauses, in boundaries, in standards that don't bend when emotions rise. The more you try to earn her respect with emotion, the more you teach her that you don't have it. But when you stop explaining, when you stop overgiving, when you stop fearing distance, she starts feeling your presence again. Not because you shouted, but because you didn't. And in a world full of noise, silence from a man of value is deafening. There's a brutal truth hiding beneath every failed relationship. You weren't dumped because you weren't good enough. You were dumped because she knew exactly how to predict you. In a world where novelty is the drug, predictability is the kiss of death. And most men, without realizing it, become emotionally transparent after just a few interactions. They show every card, reveal every thought. They hope that being understood will make them loved. But in her world, what is fully understood becomes uninteresting. Quickly, you want to know why she stopped texting first, why she started needing space, why her tone shifted from warmth to formality overnight. It wasn't because you did something wrong, it was because you became too easy to decode. She saw the shape of your intentions, the depth of your emotions, and the pattern of your behavior. And in doing so, she saw the edge disappear. Mystery to a woman is tension. And tension is the lifeblood of desire. When you tell her everything too soon, when you give without filter, when you show her your entire soul before she's even earned the right to see it, you rob her of the only thing that activates real attraction: curiosity. She doesn't want to know everything about you. She wants to wonder. And yet, modern culture teaches men the opposite. It teaches you to be emotionally available, endlessly reassuring, to over-communicate, to always express how you feel. But this isn't love, it's obedience. And obedience, when it's not balanced with power, becomes unattractive. That's why you feel like you're walking on eggshells. Because you are. Not because she's cruel, but because she's waiting to see if you'll break under pressure. And most of you do. You fold the moment she goes silent. You panic when she gets cold. You question yourself when she pulls away. You send long messages. You restate your intentions. You beg for clarity. And with every attempt to reconnect, you confirm the one thing she was testing, that you need her more than she needs you. This is where the power collapses. Let's rewind. Think about the early days, the flirtation, the excitement, the playful tension. That wasn't just chemistry. That was her not knowing where she stood. And in that uncertainty, she respected you more. But the moment you made yourself her emotional servant, the moment you showed her that her opinion of you could alter your entire mood, the game changed. You stopped being the mountain. You became the breeze. Ask yourself, when did she start losing interest? Was it after you confessed how you couldn't stop thinking about her? Was it after you started clearing your schedule just to make her feel prioritized? Was it after you reassured her day after day that you'd never leave? Ironically, the moment you tried to make her feel secure, you made her feel superior. Not intentionally, but emotionally. And here's what most men will never admit: they're addicted to being chosen. They measure their worth based on a woman's response. They hand over their self-esteem to someone who hasn't even proven they deserve that power. And when she starts acting distant, they blame themselves, not realizing that the very act of chasing is what repels her. That's not attraction, that's dependence, and dependence kills masculine energy. Let's get clinical for a moment. Psychologically, humans are wired to crave what's scarce. This is called the scarcity principle. And it applies directly to relationships. The moment you become too available, too emotionally predictable, too reactive, you lose your perceived value. Not because your value changed, but because her experience of you did. And here's the twist. The strongest relationships are not built on constant access. They're built on respect. And respect only survives when there's a boundary she knows she can't cross, a mystery she hasn't solved, a version of you she can't fully control. Machiavelli would have seen this clearly. He wouldn't beg to be understood. He wouldn't explain himself to someone who hadn't earned the right. He would observe, adapt, and if the balance of power shifted too far, he wouldn't plead. He would disappear. Now you might think this sounds manipulative. It's not. It's psychological warfare, and she's playing it whether you acknowledge it or not. The only difference is that most men play with their hearts on their sleeves, while she plays with emotional leverage. She withholds to test you. She provokes to see your reaction. She challenges to see if you fold. And if you do, the attraction dies quietly. The problem is never that you feel deeply. The problem is that you express those feelings with no strategy. Emotional honesty without emotional discipline is self-sabotage. You need to learn how to be present without being dependent, how to care without collapsing, how to love without losing yourself. The man who understands this becomes dangerous, not because he's cold, but because he's calm, not because he's rude, but because he's respected, not because he says the right things, but because he knows when not to speak. His silence is intentional, his absence is noticed, his presence is earned. She might still test him, she might still pull back, flirt with ambiguity, play hard to get, but he doesn't play at all. He watches, and when he sees the pattern repeating, emotional games, manipulations, power moves, He simply removes himself from the arena because the highest form of power is not control, it's detachment. And the woman who thought she could play him ends up haunted by the one question she never prepared for: why didn't he fight to stay? That's when the dynamic flips. That's when respect returns. That's when attraction, real attraction, reignites, not because he chased, but because he walked away without fear. And that fearlessness, that's what she remembers. The most dangerous kind of rejection is the one that never speaks. It doesn't come with a breakup text or a dramatic argument. It arrives quietly, almost politely, through subtle changes in tone, brief delays in response, and sudden disinterest masked as just being tired. And you, thinking you're being understanding, decide to give her space. You think that's maturity, but in her eyes it's confirmation. Confirmation that she can pull away and you'll still be there, waiting like a loyal dog. What you don't realize is that the real test didn't begin with conflict. It began when she subtly disrespected your time, and you smiled. When she contradicted herself, and you justified it. When she stopped investing, and you increased your effort. That's when the balance snapped, because in her subconscious mind, you became the man who tolerates quiet disrespect, and no woman desires what she doesn't respect. Disrespect in relationships rarely starts with something explosive. It's not cheating, shouting, or overt humiliation. It begins with micro-behaviors. She cancels plans last minute without apology. She takes hours or days to reply and expects instant answers from you. She criticizes your preferences, but calls you insecure if you push back. These are not personality traits. These are power probes. She's checking how far she can go before you push back. And if you never do, she keeps going. Not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. In every romantic dynamic, there is a silent negotiation happening. A woman may never say, "I don't respect him," but she'll show it in the way she forgets your boundaries. And the moment your comfort becomes her playground, the attraction dies, not with drama, but with disinterest. So what do most men do? They double down. They try to compensate for the emotional gap by being more patient, more affectionate, more present. In doing so, they fail to see the truth. They are being slowly devalued by the very person they're trying to win. It's a psychological paradox. The more you tolerate the unacceptable, the less you are valued for your goodness. And this is where Machiavelli would laugh. He would remind you that kindness without power is not virtue, it's weakness. The world does not reward the harmless. It rewards the strategic. And in love, as in politics, those who are feared just enough to be respected are the ones who are never forgotten. Let's be clear, this doesn't mean you should become cruel, cold, or manipulative. But it does mean you must recognize when the ground beneath you is shifting and respond without begging for stability. You don't explain your worth. You don't argue for your place. You don't protest for respect. You leave. But here's the kicker. Most men never leave. They stay. They believe love is proven through endurance. They think the longer they hold on, the more she'll realize their value. What they don't see is that staying after the respect is gone doesn't make you loyal. It makes you invisible. Imagine a man who quietly stops replying when the vibe changes. Not out of anger, but because he recognizes energy. Imagine a man who doesn't confront her for the disrespect, but removes his presence like a ghost. That silence, that withdrawal. It screams louder than any monologue about boundaries ever could. Because in that silence, she feels something she hadn't expected: loss. She expected you to beg, to question, to pursue. Instead, you vanished without a trace, and suddenly she's left not with power, but with confusion. Women don't regret losing weak men. They regret losing the ones who made them feel something real, and then disappeared without permission. Your job is not to fight for space in her life. Your job is to be so self-respecting, so silently firm, that she realizes her actions have consequences. That emotional laziness has a cost. That your affection is not unconditional when it's no longer mutual. You don't yell, you don't block, you simply stop watering what's already wilting. That's how you reclaim the power, not by force, but by absence. Because here's what no one told you: she never stops testing. Even years into a relationship, the tests become more subtle, more psychological. She wants to feel your edges, not because she wants a tyrant, but because without edges, there's no tension. And without tension, there's no polarity. You become a shadow of a man she once desired, soft, predictable, emotionally obedient. And one day she'll wake up and say, "I don't know what happened. I just don't feel the same anymore." What happened was simple. You passed every test by failing to push back. That's why the most powerful men aren't reactive. They're observant. They don't make emotional declarations. They read patterns. They move in silence. They don't correct a woman when she disrespects them. They disappear when it becomes a pattern, and their absence is so surgical, so unexplainable, that it lingers in her memory long after the next man has arrived. She will smile in front of others. She will post pictures. She will pretend she's fine. But deep inside, she knows she had something rare and lost it through her own choices. That's the beauty of strategic detachment. You don't just leave, you teach. And the lesson is brutal. Not every man will tolerate emotional negligence. Some men have the spine to walk away from what most would crawl for. That's the kind of man she respects. You think the damage was done when she disrespected you. But the truth is, the real damage happened when you stayed, not just physically, but emotionally. When you minimized her emotional withdrawal, when you convinced yourself that it was just a rough patch, when you lowered your standards just to keep a connection alive that had already started to rot. Most men believe that leaving is the final act of strength, but in reality, the most devastating shift happens before you leave. It's when you mentally disconnect, when you stop chasing explanations, when you look at her with the same cold precision she used to test you. That's when the dynamic shifts. Because now, for the first time, she doesn't know where she stands. And that confusion, that silence, that is fear, but not the fear of punishment, the fear of insignificance. You've become a mirror she can no longer control, a reflection she can no longer manipulate, and it terrifies her. Women don't fear the man who reacts. They fear the man who detaches, the one who doesn't scream, doesn't beg, doesn't explain, the one who simply moves on, emotionally, mentally, energetically, while she's still trying to figure out what went wrong. You don't leave with drama, you leave with silence. And that silence is deafening. The truth most men never accept is this: the tests never stop. In fact, the longer you stay, the more complex they become. They're no longer about whether you'll chase after her. Now they're about whether you'll chase after yourself, whether you'll reclaim your edge, your dignity, your presence. Because once she senses that you're emotionally gone, that you're not trying to fix her, rescue her, or decode her, something shifts in her. For the first time, she feels your absence before you even walk out the door. And that's when you become powerful again. There's a reason Machiavelli never wrote love letters. He understood that in any human connection, romantic or political, the one who needs less controls more. And in relationships, power is not found in domination, but in self-respect, in the refusal to tolerate emotional dissonance, in the ability to vanish without resentment. You must understand, she will test again. Not because she's cruel, but because she's wired to assess your strength. And strength, to her subconscious, doesn't look like aggression. It looks like restraint. It looks like indifference to chaos, like the ability to remain composed when she tries to throw you off balance. That's the real attraction. Not gifts, not compliments, not emotional availability, but the quiet tension of not being able to fully predict you. The man who doesn't flinch when she withdraws affection is the man who makes her question everything. And that's where your dominance is reborn, not in control over her, but in control over yourself. You don't move based on emotion. You don't react to provocation. You don't dance for validation. You walk into the relationship as a sovereign man, and if that sovereignty is threatened, you disappear without flinching. It's not about teaching her a lesson, it's about enforcing your standard. Because the woman who truly wants you, not your comfort, not your resources, not your emotional labor, will never test you through disrespect. She'll test you through curiosity. She'll want to understand how you think, what moves you, what you stand for. That's the test worth passing. The others, the ones who play with silence, drama, and withholding, you don't fix them, you exit. And here's the part that most men miss. Your exit must not be loud. It must be surgical. The most unforgettable departures are not the ones that come with closure. They're the ones that leave a question mark. The ones where you gave no warning, offered no explanation, just vanished, like fog after sunrise. Because the man who knows his worth doesn't plead for understanding. He doesn't beg to be seen. He allows his absence to do what his presence no longer could, restore his value. You don't chase respect, you demand it. With your silence, you don't try to remind her of your worth. You become so scarce, so distant, so unreachable, that her mind creates a version of you greater than any memory. And that's how you win. Not by convincing her to stay, but by making her regret watching you walk away, because the final test isn't hers, it's yours. Will you stay and explain, or will you leave and evolve?